Good morning. This is Kim with www.embody-light.com. And if you have not done so, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. And my website is you can set up an appointment. I do hypnotherapy, psychic readings, and energy repatterning, energy healing. So today's video is about it's in response to a viewer question, and I've seen a few things on social media about forgiveness. So recently, I had somebody ask in the comment section how I forgave what happened to me, how I did it. And I've seen some things on social media I just had to comment on. There was a statement made that it's a misconception that among the spiritual community, that you have to forgive. Well, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. That part of it would be a misconception. But if you don't forgive, there's certain things that you're preventing yourself from living the best life you could. You're really cutting yourself off from the energy flow. So let me explain how this works. If you're holding on to a trauma or a grudge, something that's unforgiven, whatever happened, whatever the event was, it's frozen in time at the moment that it happened, if you haven't known how to deal with it. So let's say, I'm just making up a story, at 2 years old, 3 years old, you had an abusive parent that was physically abusive with you, mentally, emotionally, however. Well, because you're very small and you don't know how to deal with that, that event stays frozen in time. You need to take your power back, speak your truth, those kinds of things to move that energy along. And as a little tiny child, you don't know how to do that. So that event gets frozen in time at the 2-year-old emotional stage of development. This works just like, how we know people when they have, say, issues with alcoholism or drug abuse or something, and at the age they're at, that they start abusing those substances, so say it's 13, 14, their emotional development is frozen in time at that 13 or 14-year-old stage. So then as they go through life and something happens, they respond, they go right back to that moment that's frozen in time emotionally and respond from that perspective. So say you're 2 years old, you don't know how to deal with that moment freezes in time, and it just kind of stays there. So then you go through your life, and you might be a child that seems to be getting victimized all the time. People are picking on them. Then, what might also happen is that parent that was abusing them is going to try to deflect their shame and their guilt onto that child. Well, if you weren't such a bad kid, these things wouldn't happen, those kinds of things. So that moment is frozen in time. So then that child grows up not knowing what happened, but every time they're re-traumatized by something, they can't deal with it because they go back to the emotional response of that 2 or 3-year-old that initial event happened, and so it's frozen in time. So forgiveness, let me clarify, it doesn't mean that you like or condone those behaviors, those things that were done to you. And it doesn't give the other person a free pass to abuse you anymore, or a free pass in any way, shape, or form. So say this person that offended you did something, and it was really bad, and they actually belong in prison, which was what happened in my case. Well, so it was so hard to come to a place where I actually forgave this, because a lot of if you're struggling with this forgiveness thing, it's most likely because it was something so ridiculous and so over the top, you just can't come to terms with it. But no one escapes justice, no one escapes karma. I know that we're told in this lifetime that there is no more karma. Well, planet Earth is shifting. It's going to be a 5D planet, and at that point there will be no more karma. But that doesn't mean the person that did this offending act, that never came to terms with it, never did anything to remedy it or rectify it, that they're just off scot-free when they pass away, no more karma. No, that's not true, because that person who was offending you did not gain enough of a light quotient in this life, so they're not going to be able to ascend and go to a 5D planet. When we go to a 5D planet, we incarnate with all of our memories of past lives and things intact, not the trauma from them, but the memory. A 3D planet, we have to live out that karma. So most likely that individual that offended you, that has not made amends in some way or another, is going to be living out the trauma they caused you in another lifetime. Whether it be they're the actual person traumatized, or it could be that they come, say they were a person that was abusive to women, they may come back in a situation where they're going to be abused so they understand it. Or maybe I've heard of situations where, like, the person, maybe they were like a lawyer and they had a lot of wealth and they set up foundations and stuff that helped abused women. So nobody gets off scot free like nothing ever happened. That's just not the way it works. You have to balance the energy. That's what karma is. So, all that being said, now my notes. How did I come to a place where I could forgive what happened in my life? And I haven't really said this online before, but I'm going to do it now. What was happening to me was in infancy, starting from the day I came home from the hospital. My mother was a very sound sleeper and never heard us. I don't know if she thought she had magical babies that never woke up at night or what. But both to me and my brother, we were a little less than a year apart. So our father would get up, and apparently he had a drinking problem back then. And first thing he'd do to try to shut up the screaming, crying, hungry baby was beat them. And of course, that's not going to work. A baby's not going to recognize, oh, it's like he thought we were being naughty, crying in the middle of the night, disturbing his sleep. So he beat us, merciless. That's not, I'm trying to say the word merciless without mercy. There's a word for that, and it's just not coming. So that would start. Then, when that didn't work, he would strangle us till we lost consciousness. So I had near death experience after near death experience. And of course, from that, there was some neck damage and stuff. I'm still dealing with the damage. But I couldn't really eat. I couldn't swallow. I threw up all the time because he damaged my throat so much. Well, so by the time I was a year old, I weighed somewhere between 12 and 14 pounds, and which is a really low weight. I was a very sickly baby who wasn't gaining weight. I had anemia, malnourishment, all these things, and they didn't know why. Well, it was because of what this man was doing to me. And my brother got it even worse than I did. And so all of that, first thing I need to say is, for many, many years, and it's not abnormal that you don't remember things in the first year of life, but I always thought it was very unusual that I remembered from 12 months on, because that's a little abnormal too, but I remembered everything, even making plans to move out at 24 months old when I saw him abusing my brother. Um, I I didn't know how to deal with these things, so I internalized them. And so it was about a year ago that I actually found out the extent of what happened. Once I found that out and worked on it, I had to work on the forgiveness piece. Now, the forgiveness piece had started earlier. It took me about 3 years to get through all the trauma and all the forgiving I had to do. But what happened was, I came to a point. I mean, that child I described in this first thing was me actually all my life. I always had trouble. So the last straw for me was when we went to Vegas, and I've talked about this before, and saw the shooting. And That was a very traumatic experience. Saw and heard the whole thing. I've made videos about this. And that got, I was like, I know that it was not just a coincidence that I was there, because there were all these circumstances with like the hotel switching our room so that we could see out our window that whole thing that happened. Where had I had my original room, I would have been at the other side of the hotel. We would have heard it, but we probably would not have. Well, we wouldn't have seen it. We wouldn't have known what was going on till morning. And so when I got to that, I was like, I can't live like this anymore. I don't know what's going on. Trauma just seems to follow me. I'm just trying to get through my life and not have to come back and ever repeat this. I couldn't understand what was happening. So the first thing my guides told me to do was pray for that guy that they portrayed did this. Well, at the time, I didn't really understand how corrupt the news industry was, and they aren't always telling us the truth. But I did know from what I saw and what I heard that there was no way that there was only one person doing that. But that was like a starting point for me. So I just started praying, because when you pray, you raise your frequency and it helps. And I got to the point where I just kept praying for my parents, because besides my father being physically abusive, it was my mother I had the most problems with, because she was horrendously emotionally and mentally abusive my entire life. It never stopped until she went to hospice and was dying. Where the other one tried to make amends, but he didn't know how, and didn't do a very good job of it. But I was so shocked, because he had been in that relationship with those two. He had been my saving grace, because I didn't remember these things that happened. And then he tried to change and tried to be more reasonable and nicer. So it was just so shocking, and I had to come to terms with it all. And I just kept praying and praying. And what I finally did was I just threw my hands up in the air and said, okay, source, I give up. I'm, and I'm I believe in Christ. I wouldn't term myself as a Christian, because I don't follow the religious dogma that they placed on that, but I do believe in Christ. I've seen him during these near death experiences. And I was raised Catholic, and there were some good parts to that. So, anyways, I gave it to Source, I gave it to Christ, I asked for help. I said, I just can't live like this anymore, and I don't know how to do it. So this was 2 or 3 years ago after that event. And eventually, what happened was people and situations came into my life that helped to trigger my memories. So once the memory was triggered and I could forgive it, I had to work on forgiving it. And I just had to say, okay, I'm done. I can't live like this. I forgive this, whatever this person's fate or karma is because of what they've done. It's up to Source. That's not mine to judge or anything. So I just worked on it, kept working on it, kept praying. Praying neutralizes it. It seems counterintuitive. Why should you pray for someone who abused you? That was the only way I knew how. That was the only way I could shift it. Finally, it shifted to the point where it was no longer re-traumatizing. It was just a memory, because honestly, up until that point, I would be re-triggered by childhood traumas, even of other people. If I hear something or see something, I would be sitting there fantasizing about what was going to happen if I ever came up on an adult that was abusing a child, how bad I was going to hurt them, and it wasn't going to be pretty, and they were going to be missing body parts. That's how bad it was. Was just fixated on that, and it just would never leave. I was so angry. Well, what I was doing when I felt like that, because when you hold a grudge and there's something you can't forgive, you're blocking yourself off from Source. You're blocking that heart chakra connection. And if I've talked about this so many times, that is the gateway between the spiritual world and the physical world. So if you don't move through this and you don't forgive, you're locked in a perpetual lower vibrational state, And it's like a drain that's clogged. Only some of the information and insight from source comes into you. You can't pick and choose what you block and what you open. So once I forgave that and opened up the energies, everything changed. Now, that doesn't mean that, like I said, that I like or condone those things. It has just gotten me to a point where I can deal with it. It doesn't mean that I ever have to see that other individual again if I don't want to. But it got me to the point where it deactivated it out of my field, and then those traumatic events stopped happening. So, forgive or not, it's up to you. But if you don't forgive, you're locked in a perpetual trauma situation. And once you forgive, that trauma moves out of your system. You no longer recreate it, but you still have the memory. So I hope that helps. You know, like I said, for me, I really didn't have anybody that could help me with this. A few friends I had that did, but I had to do this work myself. And the only way that I knew how to do it was to just keep praying and keep praying and keep praying. And then it eventually happened, but I basically had to throw my hands up in the air and say, I'm done. I can't live like this anymore. Help me. And that's when it stopped. So at Embody, if you can't do these things yourself, that is some of the work I do. I help other people to find that energy block and to move it out of their field so that they can be in a state of forgiveness, not meaning that they're going to call those perpetrators back into their life and be friends with them again. That's not what it means. It just means it released the energy pattern. The blockage is no longer there. And as I've said millions of times, we're like an old fashioned movie projector. Whatever script, whatever verbiage we have about ourselves, or the world is supposed to work, that's like the film we're putting out. Everybody in your world is like an actor, steps forward and plays the role you hand them to play. Once you do the forgiveness work and take your power back, there's no longer a reason for other people to step forward and keep playing that role. And doing the forgiveness work, say you're toward your original perpetrator, sometimes you've had other people in your life who were just playing out that role because it was in your field. Sometimes those other people in your life will change and no longer play out that role. Sometimes they don't, and you have to let them go. So if you need help with this and you would like to set up a session, my suggestion would be the quantum healing session. That's an hour and 15 minutes to, we could go up to 2 hours. It just depends on what work needs to be done. But the very minimum it's going to be is an hour and 15 minutes. So with that, have a blessed day. I love you all. And my website is www.embody-light.com. Bye-bye. See you next time.